There is an economic and technological revolution underfoot. How will it affect the world, and will America be able to keep up? Today, Alvin Toffler is here. He and his wife Heidi have changed people's views about the future and present since their bestseller Future Shock was published in 1970. And they do it again with their new book, Revolutionary Wealth, How It Will Be Created and How It Will Change Our Lives. Pleasure to have you here today, Alvin.
Thank you. Thanks.
So you say a revolution in wealth is sweeping the planet. What is this revolution about?
Well, wealth used to be only a matter of agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
You grew a crop, you fed your family, and that was the best wealth in the world.
Yep.
Then we came to the Industrial Revolution of about starting maybe 3 or 4 centuries ago,
mm-hmm.
and pretty soon we discovered that to create wealth, you put up factories and people worked on assembly lines, as in fact Heidi and I did after we finished university. We spent 5 years working.
Really? So that gives you an interesting perspective, right?
To see how the industrial society worked from the bottom. And we studied that. But now we know, and starting as far back as the mid-50s, we have been developing what we now call a knowledge-based economy and a knowledge-based society.
Yep.
But not very much is known about that, and that is what the function of this book is, to try to explain what do we mean by a knowledge-based society and how radically different it is and will be, not only for us, but for our kids.
Sure.
This is going to be a very strange place, but by comparison with that place that we grew up in and the place that our parents and ancestors grew up in. We're creating in the United States a new form of society. Call it a new civilization.
Well, that's pretty sweeping. So where are we going? What is this new civilization going to be like?
Well, I think what we're seeing, we don't know all the answers to that. We know that more and more economic wealth is created by knowledge, by the application of knowledge. And we have and that knowledge is not just geek knowledge. It's also knowledge of medicine, knowledge of how to manage, knowledge of 1,000 different things. But we are dependent on knowledge which is intangible. In the old economy, economics was frequently described as the science of the allocation of scarce resources. But guess what? We're dependent primarily on knowledge in the United States and in some other countries. We're primarily dependent upon knowledge, and it is not a scarce resource. I can use arithmetic. You can use arithmetic.
You don't use up the alphabet numbers.
We don't use it up. And so what we're dealing with is a resource which is central to the new economy and which is barely understood. We don't know. I mean, somebody says, well, what do you mean by knowledge? There'll be 10,000 definitions. Sure. Somebody will say, how much is there? Who knows? We know how many bits and bytes there are floating around in the world, but we don't know how much knowledge there is. And indeed, there are all kinds of mysteries about the nature of knowledge. And yet, it is the central asset, the central resource for where we are going economically and where we will be going. And one thing we don't know, and I think this is something worth developing, we coin a word in this book, as we have in other books. We coin the word obsolege, by which we mean obsolete knowledge. And in a world in which nothing changes for centuries at a time, or very little changes, what you know in your head is more or less permanent. From the time you grow up, it stays the same, and you know what you're doing, and the old folks know even more. Right. In our society, everything is changing so rapidly that knowledge that we take for granted, that we assume we know, increasingly becomes obsolete, or as we call it, obsolege. So our heads are filled with obsolege rather than knowledge. How much of what we know about our work, about our business, about our economy, or for that matter about our kids' upbringing and medicine and so forth, how much of what we know is already obsolete or on its way to being obsolete within a month?
And what you said earlier about and now we're in a case maybe where the kids are teaching the parents.
And now we have, Margaret Mead years ago, the anthropologist, pointed out this difference between pre-generative and post-generative, the terms I think she used, and that is societies in which the young learn from the old, and then there are societies in which the old learn from the young. And that obviously is more likely to be a rapid change society, something that's moving quickly, and that is not just the same generation after generation after generation. And that's what we have.
You talk about the 3 waves in the book,
right.
And it seems as though a lot of the world these days is in the second or perhaps moving into the 3rd wave. Can you tell us more about that and why that's important and what the 3rd wave is?
If we go back to the beginnings of time, 10,000 years ago, approximately, nobody knows for sure, somebody planted the first seed. That was probably a woman, We don't know for sure, but probably a woman, because in the division of labor, women did the agriculture and the men went hunting. Probably a woman, and probably in what is now Turkey, somewhere in that region, and invented agriculture. Now, that's an incredible invention. And agriculture became the primary source of existence, and the entire nature of society, historical societies, were based on agriculture. And so what happened with the invention of agriculture was we did away more or less with nomadic and hunting and gathering communities. We stayed in one place, and we worked with our families and in the fields and so forth. 350 or so years ago, came what we call the Enlightenment. Beginning of strange new revolutionary ideas began to spread, and indeed the invention of the steam engine and the first actual practical use of the steam engine came. And suddenly we found ourselves in an industrializing world, a world of smokestacks and assembly lines. And people didn't go out to the field with the family, they went to work on the assembly line. And a very interesting thing happened about the pace of daily life, how you lived. In agriculture, the family went out together as a team to work in the fields, pick the crop or plant the seeds or what have you. If little Joe came late, well, Uncle Charlie would fill in a few minutes for him. On the assembly line, you can't come late, because if you come late, you're holding up the work of 1,000 people downstream from you. So it's very expensive if anybody is not punctual. Right. And you have to do rote and repetitive work on that assembly line. And in fact, if you trace the development of the assembly line, you suddenly discover that people have clocks, people wear watches. All kinds of things change with that, and the speed of life increased. What has happened, and that led to what we call a historical second great wave of change in society. What we're living through now, certainly in the United States and in other parts and other countries, is a third gigantic wave of change, which we believe is at least as powerful and probably many times more significant and powerful than the Industrial Revolution itself. We're going through something absolutely historic, and people don't recognize. I listen to two political parties, and it's as though none of this were happening. It's the same old from both political parties.
Right, because people might wonder what your politics are, and I think you think that when you're reading the book, but yet you approach it from so many different angles and just unexpected points of views, or I think information people aren't even considering, that you really kind of transcend politics in a way if people are trying to peg you down on a certain...
well, we used to be, I suppose we used to be pegged as probably Democrats. We've never been associated with Democrats or Republicans. We're independents. And I had the pleasure of speaking to a caucus, actually, of Democrats from the House of Representatives just after the recent elections, and the Democrats won. And they had a weekend meeting, and I was asked to speak. And Nancy Pelosi was there, and later on Bill Clinton came, and the following morning, in fact, President Bush showed up as well. But I spoke to them, and I opened by saying, my wife and I are not Democrats or Republicans, we're independents. I regard you Democrats as the party of old ideas. And the only thing that saves you is that so is the Republican Party, the party of old ideas. There is no
How did that go over in the room?
Well, I actually got applause. I was surprised. It wasn't the majority, but I got a significant...
I'll applaud for you.
And the irony about all of this is the one politician who does think long range and thinks and understands a lot of this is Newt Gingrich. Forget his politics.
You've tutored him a bit, I believe?
We became friends long before he was a politician. He was a student when I met him. He was long-haired, bell-bottom trousers, glasses, and so we've known him forever. That doesn't mean that we share his politics. But he's a decent, good person, at least in experience with our lives, and has a sense of humor, and he thinks long range. And that is such a breath of air. I don't necessarily agree with what he wants to do, but he opens questions and opens wide horizons to think about.
We will be right back with Alvin Toffler, author of Revolutionary Wealth. We are back with Alvin Toffler, author of Revolutionary Wealth. Okay, you said you want to say something else about Newt. What do you got
actually,
for
two things.
Sure.
One was when he became Speaker, he was the only Speaker in history who gave the members of Congress a reading list. On his opening speech as Speaker. He said, here are some books you have to read. And the books were important books, some of them historical and so forth and so on, and said, we want you, members of Congress, should be familiar with this. And we were happily one book on that. The Third Way was one of the books on that list. But that doesn't mean that Newt and Heidi and I necessarily agree on things, because when they stayed with us, we stay up all night arguing and hollering at each other about political programs and so forth. But he is an amazingly intelligent man. And again, not just intelligent, a lot of intelligent people, but he's one of the few who thinks generations out. And you can discuss that intelligently with him. So much for Newt. He's currently, as probably everybody knows, trying to decide whether to run for president or not. And you know, the world will see.
Do you want him to run for president?
Oh, I'd like him to run.
Would you vote for him?
I'm not at all sure I would. And he knows that.
Well, you talk about the second and third wave and the fact that the U.S. is embracing this. How consciously or unconsciously, you're saying people may not, the leaders have old ideas, they may not be realizing it. And how's it going in the rest of the world? You talk about a lot about China, but you know, where are they? How are we stacking up compared to these other nations?
Well, I think for the first time since at least before World War II, we're facing opposition, economic challenge around the world, and that's a very uncomfortable position for us to be in. Surely, China. But I think that one of the things Heidi and I have learned in forecasting or thinking long range about where the society is going or where the economy is going is don't trust straight line projections. Trend extrapolation. I hear the word trend. Usually the trend means it happened, you know, it was 2% last year, 2% this year, therefore it'll be 2% the following year. That is simplistic. That is a way to get in trouble when you're trying to think about the long-term future. And China, we have been thinking several years now, probably 4 or 5 years ago, The Economist magazine published a big front cover that said, China, superpower 2020. And I think that was based on a straight line of extrapolation of where they've been going. And we could continue that. They're doing very well in terms of GDP growth, the gross domestic product. However, they know better than we do that things are not moving in a straight line, that in fact GDP is not the only way you measure the success of an economy or of a society. It is in fact a very narrow way to think about life and society, and they are now proposing a new program that they call harmonious development. Harmonious society is the slogan for Inside China, which says to me that they're worried that things are not very harmonious.
A PR spin going on there. Okay.
And in fact, we know, as we point out in Revolutionary Wealth, that the police themselves publicly announced that there are at least 35,000 to 80,000 violent protests in China every year these years. So the country is boiling with and to think about GDP growth and these sort of mechanical economic data, and sometimes not complete or not accurate data as well, and base your assumptions on China's future on GDP, that's a huge mistake. And we believe that the internal problems that they have led them to a new program that they call harmonious development. And what that is that the new leadership have said that the previous cast of characters who ran this tremendous economic development by mostly bringing in cheap labor, low-tech factories that they take from America or Europe or anywhere, that was very successful in moving hundreds of millions, maybe 400 million peasants off the land and into the cities, where they're miserable in the cities, but it's better than being out on the land.
Right, and you talk a lot about the way that, again, this has raised, you know, so many people in China out of poverty. But Americans, of course, you always hear are worried about jobs going overseas, and even politicians. Should we be worried about those jobs going overseas, or in the big scheme of thing? I know you're very big picture and long range. Is that a threat to America or not, the fact that these jobs are going overseas?
Well, I think...
Or is it good or bad for the world, let alone America?
Well, I think if you look at it from a global perspective, again, anything that moves 400 million people off the land where they were starving into cities where they can earn a terrible living, but at least a living of some kind, is positive for the planet, in my opinion. But that cannot just continue. Is that a threat to us? I think it is a threat to us if we do not make certain changes. And one of the fundamental changes where we should be ahead of the rest of the world instead of behind is to change the concept of what we mean by education and where it is done and how it is done today.
You talk a lot about the problems in our educational system. You want to...
Yeah. The U.S. didn't have a public education system until the late 1830s, 1800s. And there was a big debate at that time. Rich people said, yeah, we should have a public education system for children. Poor people said, no way. I can't afford for my child to go to school. I need him to work so we can eat, right? And that went on for decades. Finally, business got involved. Business got involved in the late 1800s in the U.S., and what it said was, you know what? These rural kids who are coming to the city to work in the factories, they're not very good. So what we need is an education system that will introduce, and this is the terminology they actually used, industrial discipline.
Yeah.
End quote. Quote, end
so
quote.
We really do have an educational system designed for the industrial age.
It's designed to produce kids who will be, you know, good little factory workers. But the fact of the matter is, those factories, or at least those kinds of factories, simply aren't going to exist for the generation of kids that are now coming out of our schools. And this isn't just an American problem. If you go to Korea or Japan, you have kids going to school all day long. They come home at the end of the school day. They have a little snack, and they go back to school, maybe a private school, and they're till 11 o'clock at night.
Wow.
11 o'clock at night, 10, 11 o'clock. Heidi and I actually visited in Tokyo what's called the Juku, which is this late after-school school. And we were there at 10 p.m., and we had 10-year-olds studying remedial calculus. Remedial calculus at 10 p.m. So what kind of life do these kids have?
So the idea is that the way to fix education is just throw more at them.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Just, you know, 24 hours a day, we'll just hook you up to the machine.
Right.
You know?
Exactly. Now, what do we need to be educating them about? Well, there's a lot of things that kids need to know in this world that they didn't necessarily need to know a lot about before. For one thing, how to make sense out of the media. They're being bombarded by new media telling them all kinds of things, some very good, some terrible, some criminal, some sadistic or sexual, and all kinds of stuff is coming out of the screens.
You mean media or TV and films or all of the other programming?
Most of the media, the popular media. Kids ought to know about the nature of the media. How does stuff get made? Why this made and not that made? What's the role of advertising? Should there be? Should there not? Et cetera, et cetera. They need to understand this intangible world that they're a part of, and that's just one. There's also the assumption in our education system that only teachers teach. The fact of the matter is, kids learn more, and I learn more, and you learn more from people outside the school. We learned about other things, perhaps, but we learn more from the people around us. Of course. Why not bring some of those people into the teaching program? Why not ask people to come to the class? I'm a pilot. I'm a dentist. I'm a this. I'm a that. This is what we do. This is how it works. Why not take kids and show them what a bank is and how that relates to a department store or whatever? Because the outside world is where they're going to be living, not in a classroom.
So some even practical kind of application of it. But also, I wonder, is part of it, you talk about the difference between, say, second and third wave in industrial and knowledge-based societies where, you know, the industrial is all standardized, whereas the third wave is more customized. But in education, would that be that you recognize individual differences and it's not just one curriculum fits everybody?
Exactly.
You will sit here from 10 a.m. to 11 p.m. and you will study this page of, you know, pages 2 to 3 today and 4 and 5 tomorrow. Some, you know.
Absolutely. What we need, we're going into, this is another mistake people make about thinking about the future, in my opinion. They think we're moving into a society which is going to be more and more uniform. I think the reverse is true. We're moving from what the sociologists used to call mass society to a demassified, highly diverse society, which is changing at high speed. And that's the world kids are going to live in. And therefore, the idea that everybody gets the same education, everybody starts at the same age, why 5? Maybe this one should start at 3 and that one at 7, who knows? And why should teachers be the only ones who are theoretically providing useful knowledge, and so on. So the whole thing has to be completely rethought. And I just got, I can tell you something I haven't talked about yet. I just got a letter from a high school kid in Asia. I won't give you any more definition than that.
Name and address? No.
and he's saying, I read your book. I don't want to be sitting in a classroom where I'm treated like a machine or I'm trained for the industrial age. I want to quit school. What should I do? He says, I don't intend to stop learning. I want to read, and I want to visit all parts of the world. But I don't want to sit in that classroom anymore.
I want to hear your answer when we come back. We'll be right back with Alvin Toffler, author of Revolutionary Wealth. And we are back with Alvin Toffler, author of Revolutionary Wealth. So what did you tell that little kid who wants to drop out of school?
The message just came, and I'm still thinking and pondering. Heidi and I are talking about what do we say to this kid. We also have several emails from a group in, of all places, Pakistan, who want to create a third-wave school. They're saying, what would that consist of?
Sure.
And of course, I have to know more about where in Pakistan, what in Pakistan,
right,
and so forth and so on. But I have to say, look, the villains here are not the teachers, because every time I speak to some group, there are always teachers in the room who say, I would love to make this change or that change, but I can't. I've got these rules and regs that tie my hands. My sister's a teacher. So it's not a question of an attack on teachers. It's the entire structure of the system that was created. It was not created for this purpose. It was created for, as I said before, producing little good factory workers for a society going into the industrial age.
I think of Mark Twain's quote that I never let schooling get in the way of my education, yeah, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah, yeah, and you say, and not so much really a political comment, but just a fact that you say that, you know, the No Child Left Behind thing, what does it do? It really just relies on more standardized tests, exactly, which goes against your whole concept.
The kids are different. They need to be treated as different, and they need different experiences, not just marching together. But, you know, the yellow buses come. That's preparation for commuting for work to the factory.
But isn't that fun?
And more and more people are working at home. You know, are they saying to kids you can work at home? No, I don't think so. Not very many. And so on. Anyway, I think education is one of our great institutions which is now hopelessly obsolete, but it's not the only one. And in fact, if one were to project forward, the question that I would raise is, what's the next step? We've had the early part of the technological revolution, Silicon Valley and that whole thing. We've had a financial revolution with the invention of all kinds of new deals and contractual investment forms and so forth and so on. Very complex new system, and we've had lots of incredible amount of change, faster than any time in history. The question is, how do our social institutions, family structure, businesses, government agencies, how do these social institutions react to this? We, I believe, are going to see...
We're having trouble keeping up?
Yes, we're having a crisis in the pension system, a crisis in the health system, a crisis in this system, that system. GIs coming back from the war can get treated in Washington, but they can't somehow get the proper papers to get to the next hospital. And what we're seeing is what I see, we're on our way to what I believe are going to be a series of institutional Katrinas. We're going to see one institution after another collapse or become totally ineffective. And it's not just the U.S. You asked about other countries. Same thing's true in Tokyo. Same thing's true in Tokyo. The same thing's true in a bunch of
In fact, the Japanese have really, remember the early 90s when everybody thought Japan was all about Japanese management styles. And well, despite all of the terrible things in the world today with the problems with education and certainly terrorism and all that, you still remain pretty optimistic. You say it's a pretty darn good time to be alive?
It is. I think we are doing better in terms of the number of human beings who are not desperately poor. We need to change the desperate poverty, but in terms of the number of people, population that survives, and that many are doing reasonably well, this is unheard of in human history. We're doing better than any previous history. As to where we go, I think we're heading toward, and I'll wind up with this, maybe 30 or 50 years from now, we're facing a collision point in human destiny, in that we are going to redefine two things simultaneously. We're going to redefine what a human being is.
Well, I can't wait to hear the answer to that. Thank you very much.
One more.
Sure. Which is?
Which is, and we're redefining the cosmos.
Cosmos. Thank you very much for being here today, Alvin Toffler. The book is revolutionary. Well, thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.